Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our first Lunch and Learn. This is part of our summer series, and we are tackling a couple different topics on how we can improve our education and our compassion for animals that we interact with every day. So I am Reasa Currier. I'm the Director of Department of Animal Sheltering. And again, I know some people are just still filtering in here. So we'll give it a minute. Again, this is our first of our Lunch and Learn series. And today we are talking about wildlife. We interact with wildlife in so many different ways, often without even realizing it. They're all around us. And from the way that we care for our lawns to how we care for our own pets, our everyday decisions can have a significant impact on the animals that we share our environment with. So I'm excited to be joined by some very esteemed guests to talk about ways on how we can protect and support our wild neighbors. So today we are joined by Dr. Katherine Edwards. She's a wildlife management specialist for Fairfax County, and she has been with the county for about 10 years in this role. She received her bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Virginia and her master's degree in wildlife sciences and her doctorate from Mississippi State University. She is a certified wildlife biologist, and she can tell us a little bit more about what that means in a minute. We also have Dr. Jennifer Riley. She is the hospital director for Blue Ridge Wildlife Center, and that's near Boyce, Virginia. They are the only wildlife exclusive veterinary hospital that serves Northern Virginia. And she has been in that role since 2016 and received her veterinary degree from Tufts University. So Dr. Riley, we're going to start with you. Most people are not even aware that a wildlife veterinarian is a specialty. So for our young people that are thinking about maybe that as a career opportunity, and for those that are interested in learning more, tell us a little bit about your background and what exactly you all do at Blue Ridge Wildlife Center.
Sure. Yeah, so I would say that the veterinary profession is a lot more diverse than I think a lot of people realize. Certainly there's like the dog and cat vets and the large animal vets. There's not actually a specialty specifically for wildlife medicine, so it's not a boarded specialty like cardiology or internal medicine would be, although they are discussing that. So it's currently kind of up for debate if we're going to make this a specialty. So instead of having an internship and residency that are specific to wildlife medicine as a specialty, we kind of just take the opportunities that we can to learn more about it. So myself, I did 2 wildlife internships and I did a zoo medicine fellowship. So those were ways that I could learn about exotic species and really get specialized in this field, even though there's not a boarded specialty specifically for wildlife. So definitely wildlife medicine is one of those non-traditional routes in veterinary medicine, but they are available. Those are jobs that you could do. And as well as a lot of other different exotic animal stuff, zoo medicine stuff, all of that kind of stuff is tightly related to wildlife medicine. And I think wildlife medicine is also very heavily involved in One Health, public health, things like that. So it links to a lot of other specialties. And then Blue Ridge Wildlife Center, as you said already, is the only wildlife exclusive hospital in the Northern Virginia area. We are really fortunate in Virginia to actually have quite a few rehabbers. We have a lot more than many other states do. So in our area, we are the larger hospital up here. As you go down 81, you also have the Wildlife Center of Virginia and then the Southwest Wildlife Center in Roanoke. They have Tidewater, which is not a hospital, but it's a network of rehabilitators out towards Virginia Beach. So we actually do have pretty good coverage across the state, which is really nice. But for everything kind of north of Richmond and then all the way from Arlington all the way to West Virginia on that side, we're kind of the hospital in that region. And we see about 4,000 patients a year. We have 2 veterinarians on staff, so myself and an associate vet, licensed veterinary technician. We have multiple rehabilitators, and then we're also a teaching hospital. So we have veterinary students, veterinary technician students, rehabilitation interns, all kinds of wildlife professionals that are really coming here to get an experience working with wildlife and also doing some research, doing some One Health work. and kind of getting a really well-rounded idea of what goes into wildlife medicine.
Wow. So you all are at the intersection of so much. You're teaching, you're educating, you're rehabilitating, and you're also working across the spectrum of public health um, and of course we work with you with the shelter. You work with Dr. Edwards with the county. So that's a lot of balls that you have up in the air at any given time. So people always ask me this question, so I thought I'd ask you. Do you have a species that you particularly enjoy working with?
Honestly, all of them, and it kind of changes day to day. Right now, I'm always really excited about amphibians that come in. I think it's probably just because there's less of them than other species, and I think people don't understand how well they're actually healing and how easily they do heal. So we get some pretty horrific injuries in on amphibians, and they're just really satisfying to see how well these guys heal. So I'd say they're my current top class of animals.
Okay, that's good to know. Amphibians is yours. So Dr. Edwards, um, can you tell us a little bit about the many diverse species that live in Fairfax County? I think most people don't realize that we have a lot of green spaces, and with that comes a lot of different animals. And also a little bit about your role as the county wildlife specialist, because that's a unique role. Not every county has one. We're very lucky. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Certainly, just to kind of start with an overview of wildlife, I agree. There's this common kind of misconception that urban and suburban areas are really devoid of wildlife, or wildlife, isn't able to persist here or to thrive here. And what we see is the opposite in many cases, where many of our wildlife species can really coexist here successfully, can really exploit a lot of the human modified environments that we have. And so we do see many different species that are able to thrive in these areas. So some of the more common that we see, white-tailed deer are very abundant within the county. And so we have management program, which I can discuss here shortly. But in terms of other wildlife, raccoons, opossums, skunks, we have various bat species. Reptiles and amphibians are also near and dear to my heart. They were a topic of study of mine for about a decade. So lots of snakes that we get questions about are rat snakes, our DeKay's brown snakes, many turtle species, box turtles, snapping turtles. All of these are able really to coexist and thrive in these areas because of different habitat types, different resources that are available to them that are brought on by human development. In terms of my role, so having a wildlife specialist at the county level is fairly unique to Fairfax County and to other counties within Virginia. So most places don't have really a specific wildlife position. My position in our wildlife program was really created back in the late 1990s, stemming from concerns related to overabundant deer and public safety concerns. And so it was brought on as a public safety program, but it's really grown and expanded over time in dealing with all these different facets of wildlife conservation and management. And so in my role as a specialist, as my title implies, I deal with wildlife management. We do have a county deer management program, as well as a Canada geese management program that I oversee and implement, but also just as the subject matter expert for wildlife within the county. So I interface with all of our different county agencies, our state and federal wildlife partners, conservation organizations, our wildlife health community, community members, media, et cetera, really for all things wildlife. So dealing with questions related to animal identification, what's this animal, what's this scat, what are these tracks, those type of questions, wildlife behavior, damage prevention and mitigation techniques, a lot of dealing with human and wildlife conflicts and how to resolve those conflicts humanely on properties within the county, population control measures that people might be able to take and that the county takes to maintain sustainable wildlife within the county. And then also delving more recently into the wildlife health aspects. So working with our health partners, as well as our animal protection police and the state wildlife agency, the Department of Wildlife Resources, to look at wildlife diseases, wildlife health concerns within the county. And then we also conduct active surveillance for some diseases, such as chronic wasting disease affecting white-tailed deer. We work collaboratively also with our park authority. So implementing inventory and monitoring surveys, getting out in the field and doing surveys for bats, for breeding birds, reptiles and amphibians, and also habitat assessments, really to inform wildlife conservation and management practices here within the county. So again, just a kind of wide breadth of responsibilities related to wildlife with this position.
Great, thank you. You mentioned the term urban wildlife. Can you expand on that and tell me a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. So when we're talking about urban wildlife, we're really just talking about species that live in and near cities and suburban areas and are able to make use of human-dominated ecosystems. So a lot of these are species that are very flexible in their habitat and food requirements, species that can withstand a high degree of disturbance, that are adaptable and can change their behaviors in terms of changing environments, and species that will make use of those human modified environments, such as food sources like garbage, bird feeders, pet food left outdoors. So ones that are really more flexible and can take advantage of that. The field of urban wildlife is really kind of a fairly new arena in terms of the whole wildlife conservation and management breadth, and that it's getting a lot more attention recently because it's important to know about our wild neighbors in urban environments, really to be able to address human and wildlife conflicts, address issues with public safety, but from the wildlife perspective, also understanding what those stressors are in the human, arena and what our environment is doing to wildlife so that we can continue to promote and conserve biodiversity and functional ecosystems and partnering with our wild neighbors.
Okay. Well, and that's interesting that you pointed out, and I saw a snippet of a segment on TV over the weekend, how they're noticing a deep, dramatic decline in certain bird species, and they're noticing that in the same places where they're seeing other bird species really thriving. Mm-hmm. And so the influence of our activities and putting food out, right, that we realize that really impacts many animals. Before I go on, I just want to let everybody know that if you do have questions for Dr. Riley or Dr. Edwards, you can enter them in the Q&A. So you can just put those in right there, and I will be checking throughout our conversation and making sure I answer them. And we'll also have some time at the end. So Dr. Edwards, what are the kind of calls you're getting most frequently this type of year?
Well, this time of year, so it's baby animal season. So a lot of that is related to young wildlife and whether it needs help. And Dr. Riley can expand more on this, I'm sure, as we get further into the conversation. But right now we're going into peak fawning season. So our deer fawns being born, they're often left alone on, residential lawns and gardens and public areas. And a lot of people think that they're either orphaned or abandoned. So we're doing a lot of consultations on what to look for if a fawn is truly in need or if it needs to be left alone, which is the case in almost all instances. Same with Canada geese. They've just gone through nesting periods and they're very protective parents. And so we get lots of calls about defensive geese or aggressive geese protecting their nests and goslings. Snakes are active this time of year. So lots of the questions just generally about snake identification or ways to maybe deter them from properties where they're unwanted. Turtles crossing roads. I know the county recently just put out some information and we just had World Turtle Day last week. So getting a lot of questions about that and how to help them safely across the road. Generally questions about foxes, raccoons, and coyotes being active during daylight hours. So that's something that we see a lot this time of year, especially when you have busy moms that are caring for a lot of mouths to feed. They're very active looking for food. We also have a lot of people doing yard work and landscaping this time of year, which can displace those animals. Right. So just seeing them out and active is not necessarily a cause for alarm. So doing, again, a lot of talking people off the ledge in terms of what they're seeing out in nature and that those are actually normal behaviors this time of year. And then we get a lot of wildlife that like to den under porches and decks, our groundhogs, our foxes, beavers damaging trees. We get a lot of calls about beaver damage related to stormwater facilities. So just kind of the whole gamut of things happening right now. Again, just one of our most active times of year for wildlife.
So it's your high call volume time. So definitely I'm seeing a lot of posts about the turtles. So if
Yes.
someone sees a turtle, so the best guidance is just you can help move the turtle along, you can pick him up and kind of help him or her go in the direction they're going, right? That's
Yes, in the direction they're going.
Right.
Taking care if it's a snapping turtle because they
Right.
can pose some risk. But not relocate them. A lot of people like to take, especially box turtles, and drive them to a nearby pond.
Yes.
So we want to refrain from doing that. Just move them across the road in the direction they're going and let them go on their natural way.
Okay, that's very important. And then you said something else about just animals being out and about during the day. Like that is a normal thing for animals to do. It doesn't mean that they have rabies, right? That's a call we often get. I saw a fox. It was at 11 a.m. It must have rabies. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, foxes in particular, I mean, the red fox around here, they're very prolific within the county. I think every neighborhood has at least one or two fox families that are out and about. And so we see them active during daylight hours pretty much regularly at this point. They're very accustomed to human activity. They're very habituated a lot of times to disturbances. And so seeing red fox, especially out during the day, is really not a cause for alarm in any capacity. We get more calls about raccoons since, they're traditionally thought of as just strictly nocturnal. But again, this time of year, they're out foraging with trying to support themselves as well as support their young. They might be having to move their young. If there's been landscaping or a tree's been taken down or a den site's been disrupted. So we just need to give them a little bit of space and compassion to do that. Whenever we get those calls, I just ask a lot about the behavior of the animal, if it's showing a natural fear response, if it's showing any other signs of illness or injury that might indicate, if there's potential rabies concern or other injury where it might need attention through wildlife rehabilitation. So just asking those questions to kind of get the full image of what's happening with that animal. But just transversing a property. And, we had a call recently about a raccoon that went down a sewer during the day, and there was a lot of concern. Those are typical behaviors as they're moving from one spot to the other and trying to avoid humans in the process.
Okay, that's good to know. So Dr. Riley, that brings me to you. You are getting a lot of calls about animals that are sick and injured. And so what advice do you give people that are coming upon these animals, but also what is something that is important not to do if you find animals in need of help?
Sure. So I would say our first piece of advice is always keep yourself safe. I think people tend to they see an animal and they want to go fix it immediately. That's kind of the human need to help, right? So we always say don't touch it immediately. If you can get a picture, that's great. Call a rehabber right away. That's the first step, is before you intervene in any way, call a rehabber and make sure that's not just normal behavior. Like Dr. Ryder was saying, most of these situations are literally just completely normal behaviors. And the more you interfere, the higher risk there is for things to not go well. So as soon as you see something, give us a call. You can always call the center. We do receive a few hundred calls a day this time of year, and we only have one person working up front most days. So things often go to voicemail. So that's something to expect. And certainly other home rehabbers, they typically have full-time jobs. These are often volunteers. So always leave a message. I think a lot of people don't leave a message and then they just feel like nobody was available to help me, but always leave a message. You will get a call back, and give us kind of all of the details of the situation, especially why you think that animal is in need. Like you were talking about before, typically they have some behavior in mind that they were concerned about, and it's not actually a problem. So about 90% of the phone calls that we get end up with nothing happening, nobody coming into care. We just tell them that was a neat thing to see and, don't worry about it. The other percentage of things where it is a bigger problem, we'll kind of give step-by-step instructions on how to contain that animal safely, and what to do with it. So one of the things that we always say not to do is do not offer food or water. And that's because it's very, very easy to aspirate a lot of these babies, especially. So this time of year, we're seeing a lot of babies. People will give them even like an eyedropper of water is enough to literally drown them or to cause them to aspirate, which can lead to pneumonia. And then we have a really hard time treating what should have been a healthy baby. So definitely don't offer any food or water. The other big issue is, these guys are in a lot of pain in many cases. If it's a hit by car, if it's somebody that's obviously fractured, broken, bleeding, that kind of thing. Think about a human ambulance, right? They're not giving you a sandwich as soon as you get in the ambulance. They're going to deal with the pain and stuff first. So think of it that way. If you have an animal with multiple open fractures, they don't need food in those fractures. So keep food and water as far away from these guys as possible. And just follow the rehabber's advice on if they need to come in, how that should be contained if they do need to come in, and what safety precautions to take.
Okay, that's great advice. And so contacting a rehabber, as you said, there's quite a few organizations that serve our area. So I know the Wildlife Rescue League has a line too that staffs through volunteers, and then they're kind of the intermediary, right? So they will then coordinate, whether it's depending on what people find, whether it's a bat or a bird or a possum, they have their list that they coordinate with. And then Department of Wildlife Resources also maintains a list of licensed wildlife rehabilitators on their website. Are there any other resources that folks should know about so that they can contact the appropriate rehabbers?
Yeah, I would say in Northern Virginia in general, calling Blue Ridge directly or calling the Wildlife Rescue League directly are the best places to start, because we can always kind of reroute you if needed. Like both of those groups will generally know where to send you. We do get a lot of calls directly through animal control. Things are coming in that way as well. And also using that DWR list, it does break it down by county, so you can actually find the closest rehabbers. Usually, many of those are home rehabilitators and are going to be doing more with healthy orphans. So at our hospital, we try to avoid having healthy orphans here. Those go to the home rehabbers, and we try to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible with our hospital resources and really taking the sick and injured ones that need that assistance. So if you know that it's broken or bleeding, it's also fine to just call us first. We get a lot of calls directly from the finders. But otherwise, you can go through those other routes. And if you're a Facebook user, I always recommend people join Virginia Wildlife. It's a really good Facebook group with a lot of members, and the administrators are all rehabilitators in the state, so they tend to respond to emergencies really quickly. So even if you're waiting on a call back from us or from the Wildlife Rescue League, you can always post something there, and they'll kind of give you the best resources in your area if you put the location, a photo, and kind of what's going on.
Great. And then we had a question about calling the non-emergency line here in Fairfax County and what services that will provide. So that will connect you to the animal control services. So that's it. And Dr. Edwards, please feel free to jump in. But if you need help with transporting an animal, that's a number you can call as a resource.
Sure. Within Fairfax County, you can call the police non-emergency number that will connect you currently with our animal protection police and soon to be our animal services officers. And they can respond to calls about sick or injured wildlife, potentially orphaned or abandoned baby animals as well. And so they do work with the network of rehabilitators as well as local vet hospitals as well, so that we can get those wildlife to health professionals to triage them and then transport them if they need longer term care with the licensed rehabber. So that is a number you can call as well for assistance.
I think in any jurisdiction, Arlington, Alexandria, Loudoun, you always have that as a resource to call that number if you do need some additional help. But one thing I know often people find very distressing, and Dr. Edwards, you talked about it, is to see a baby deer and it's alone and banded, or a bird on the ground, a fledgling. And so and sometimes if people, it's your natural instincts, there's cats around, there's threats, there's children, and you want to pick it up, right? And you want to put it somewhere. But oftentimes the parents are on scene, watching that situation, caring for that baby. So when do you know if it's something like this is, I need to call, I need to pick it up, I need to move it, versus just watch and wait?
Certainly. Some of the general guidelines are, is it furred or feathered? Is it, does it have obvious types of injuries? Do you see signs of trauma, broken bones, bleeding? In terms of fawns, is it up and wandering incessantly? Is it crying? constantly, that might be a sign that the mother has left it and not come back. So just kind of assessing that situation depending on the stage of the animal and what the actions it's taking, but generally looking for signs of trauma, looking for signs of flies or maggots would be a sign of reaching out for an animal that needs assistance. But for fawns that are just laying peacefully in the yard, that's typical. They're hiders. They're not going to get up and run. They're taught to stay put and to camouflage themselves as best as possible, which it's obviously not easily done in a yard that's just mowed grass. They kind of stick out like a sore thumb, but they don't know any better. And so we do see that a lot of times. So we just tell people to watch it from a distance and enjoy, seeing nature and keep an eye on it to make sure it's not wandering into the road or somewhere where it's going to be, in an unsafe situation, to keep pets away from the animals when they're out there to the best of their ability. If there are outdoor cats, trying to talk to your neighbors or someone, if it's one of their pet cats, to see if they can keep it indoors, if you've got fledgling birds on the ground, but really just monitoring it from a distance. And then if you do see those additional signs, that it might be in distress or need assistance, then calling, again, as Dr. Riley said, calling Blue Ridge, calling one of the wildlife partners, calling the animal protection unit to get additional guidance to see if it's something that actually needs to be picked up and brought in. Fawns especially are a case where we're not allowed to rehabilitate them in Fairfax County. This is due to concerns related to chronic wasting disease that's been confirmed here in Fairfax. And so within Fairfax County and our surrounding jurisdictions, we're not allowed to rehabilitate fawns. So it's really especially important for them to leave them alone and give them that space and time for mom to come back, because it's usually often when people aren't looking. It's for brief periods of time, usually at dawn and dusk, and then she'll take the fawn and move it. And so as long as we can stay away and just kind of keep a watchful distance on it, that's the best case scenario for fawns.
Okay, well, that's the perfect segue to my next question. So Dr. Riley, how do you determine once you've taken an animal in, whether they can be or should be returned to the wild? So I know sometimes you have the restrictions for based on DWR guidance and other things you have to factor in.
Yeah, so that's kind of the first step that we take when we're triaging something. Once something is stable, is can this be released? And for wildlife, unlike dogs and cats, they really need to be perfect. They need to be able to hunt perfectly. They need to be able to survive and do all the normal skills that they would have to do in the wild. So while it's okay for your dog or cat to have arthritis and be on, pain meds for the rest of their lives, we certainly cannot do that with wild animals. They have to be functional and comfortable. So if we see any kind of injuries that are going to prevent that from happening, then we will euthanize on intake. That's something that we don't want this animal suffering. We don't want them going through all of that. So, and a lot of times it's very obvious things like open necrotic fractures. So bones that are broken, exposed to the environment, and discolored and dead effectively. Those are not things that we can fix, right? Or things that have, they fractured a long time ago and now they're coming in and that bird can't fly. We want birds to be able to fly. So there's certain things like that are very quick deal breakers for us. But knowing that we have to get this animal to survive and thrive in the wild. Another example I would give is for turtles. Right now, we're getting a lot of lawnmower turtles. So turtles that basically have the top of them shaved off from lawnmower blades. And sometimes it's a really minor fracture. It doesn't look bad at all, but it is directly over their spine. So if their hind end isn't working, if they're not able to pass eggs, they're going to have a dystocia. They're going to get blocked up and ultimately die from that. So we have to kind of consider those things, that even if they're mentally appropriate, even if they otherwise seem okay, if they can't use their hind legs, that's not going to be a releasable turtle. So there's a bunch of different kind of things like that we're always considering as soon as we're taking these animals in. And then figuring out, how do we get them comfortable? Our goal is always to alleviate pain. So whether that be by pain medications during treatment or euthanasia as quickly as we can provide it once we know that's the situation, that's always our goal.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely a totally different analysis, right, than we do at the shelter and folks treating companion animals do. They have to have all those skills. So
and there are the legal regulations, like you mentioned too, from Fish and Wildlife. And if we were to keep an animal as an ambassador, which I would also say is a very low chance of ever happening, we do have about 20 ambassadors. But those are very carefully selected animals, and Fish and Wildlife has rules about where you can amputate on wings. It's not legal to amputate in certain places. It's not legal to have a blind animal. So certain things are legally not appropriate either.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So you mentioned the turtles and the lawnmowers, and that also goes back to something, Dr. Edwards, you were talking about, is just so many people are, as soon as the weather warms up, they start doing yard work, they start trimming the branches of the trees, they start digging, and all of those things. What are things, how can gardeners and people working their yard keep in mind during the spring cleanup that there's animals that are using that space as well, and how their uses for that space, and how to protect them during that spring cleanup?
Wasn't sure if that was for me or for Dr.
Well, for
Riley.
both of you, go ahead, either one.
Sure. I mean, we typically say for, I think in terms of landscaping, and a lot of people don't really want to hear this, but the slower the better, in terms of if you're going to be doing tree work, taking a limited time and slowly doing that so that at least you're causing some noise, causing some disruption in the area, so that if there are animals that are denning and nesting in that area, they're attuned to that, and for those that are able to, they might be able to move their young into a different place before the tree comes down. Also, a lot of our conversations that we're having with people in terms of outreach and education is talking about conservation measures that you can implement in your yard for wildlife to support them. So native plants, leaving what we might consider unsightly vegetation and debris piles and brush piles and rocks. These are all structural items that wildlife use. There's big campaigns about, not mowing your lawn for periods of time, or to leaving leaves to help our insect population and everything over winter. So a lot of those practices are really beneficial for wildlife, and it's just being able to talk to people and try and get some understanding on that it might, again, be unsightly for a short period of time, but in the long run, it's really helpful to maintaining our wildlife populations and supporting them.
And I would add that also with mowing and stuff, especially, a lot of the problems that we see are people, weed whacking or mowing where grass is too high. So if you're keeping things as trim as possible and being consistent with it, that's always good. If you're using a riding mower, we always recommend raising it to at least an 8-inch height. That will get over most box turtles and prevent a lot of those injuries. And then for myself, when I have to mow, I literally sweep in front of where I mow. I get a broom out or a stick or something else and kind of agitate the grass in front of you and then push. It takes, twice as much time, but it's something that you can do to, save yourself the time of transporting an animal an hour and getting into a wildlife center. So there's definitely benefits to doing all that stuff. And as Dr. Edwards mentioned, we always promote native plants. They don't need to be mowed. They look really nice. They show up on their own. They kind of take care of themselves. It makes your life so much easier. I've converted most of my yard. We have a big native garden here at the center as well. And not having to mow not only saves you time, it prevents the injuries. It supports native wildlife in a way that we cannot mimic with feeders and grass, basically. So definitely with all the schooling things.
And I agree with everything you just said. And we will get, some questions too. I mean, obviously a lot of HOAs have restrictions, and the county has restrictions on grass height and those type of things. So, and it's not possible in all cases to have natural landscaping. But again, I agree wholeheartedly with what you just said, Dr. Riley, of just going out and disturbing the environment first. If you've got overgrown grass, if you've got your flower beds that have, overwintered, and now you're going out to replace things, just to disturb those environments, so that if there are lizards and snakes and everything else, or baby bunnies, which we see frequently in yards, if they're out there, then we can become aware of those and avoid those areas when we're doing our landscaping.
The cottontails are definitely an ongoing thing that we see in yards from as early as February, March, all the way through October. And even when people are sweeping their yards or poking around and agitating it, they often don't find them. That's how good these guys are at hiding. Many times it's the cat or dog finding the nest that alerts you to it. And then we have a lot of people who are like, oh, my dog's in the yard. I want to just scoop all these buns up and bring them into you guys. And that's never okay. So we always remind people that, mom is so much more successful with these babies than we are. In 3 to 6 weeks max, they will be completely out. And by the time people find them, they're often only a week away from leaving anyway. People don't realize, how close they are to leaving. And then if the dog or cat does get them, we always say only the one that was, in the mouth that you saw. If you saw this happen, the whole nest does not need to come in. Put everybody else back and just bring the one in. And then mark off the nest. You can use the upside down laundry basket. If you have a smaller dog, you can use an upside down wheelbarrow or lawn furniture to cover something for a larger dog. There's so many options of ways to keep your pets out. And I think you mentioned this earlier, Dr. Edwards, too, but that's why fawns, are left in yards. That's why bunny nests are in yards. They want to have pets in the yard. Having that domestic predator in the yard actually makes it safer for them because they're scaring away a lot of their native predators. So many people are confused by that. They're like, why would this bunny make a nest in my yard with my dog? Because that's the safest place for it. You're kind of going to scare away these other predators. So foxes do that. Deer certainly do that. They want to leave their deer fawn in your yard, not out where foxes and stuff are going to get them. So they're going to always kind of prefer your yard. And the more you can do to find those guys and keep your pets away, the better.
Well, and as you said, it's such a short time, right? People call and they said, there's these fox kits in my yard. What do I do? And it's like, enjoy them. What a special thing that you have these cute little fuzzy babies in your backyard. Enjoy them for the few weeks that they need to use the space. And it might be a minor inconvenience to have to leash walk your dog, or, you have a bird nesting in the wreath at your front door and you may have to use the side door. But I think that's such a small price to pay for seeing wildlife flourish in this environment. So that's a great point. And the other thing is some of that more invasive landscaping, I think folks could look at it, doing it at it seasonally at a different season when you might not have the intensive usage that wildlife use it for in the spring. So looking at the fall, late fall or winter, before those bird nests are in there and those rabbit nests are in the grass. So that is wonderful guidance. And so we had another question come in. Dr. Riley, if you receive non-native wildlife, do you have to euthanize them right away, or can you relocate them?
Yep. So in Virginia, there's no legal rehabilitation for non-native wildlife. So invasive animals are euthanized on intake. The one thing that I will say about that is we're certainly not recommending people find invasives and bring them to us for euthanasia. We don't want that. I'm sure you don't want that. Many of the invasive species we have in this area are not going to decrease in population by euthanasia. We're not going to solve that problem with euthanasia. So we use it very much as a tool to alleviate suffering in the animals that come in. We don't have healthy animals coming into rehab. So these are typically, the most common species would be starlings, house sparrows, pigeons, red-eared sliders.
Yeah.
There's a couple of common ones that we do get quite a few of in, and these are horrifically injured animals in most cases that, much of the time would have to be euthanized even if we did attempt treatment. They just are not, in good enough condition to be treated. But it is sad when you get animals that, are confirmed orphans and there's nothing massively wrong with them yet, but it's a nest of starlings. And yes, that whole nest does need to be euthanized because they cannot be rehabilitated, they cannot be released. And in Virginia, it's not legal for any person to have them either. So in some states, they don't have laws about invasives, and if you wanted to keep one, you could, but that's not the case in Virginia. In Virginia, it's not legal for you to have them. It's not legal for me to have them. So they have to be euthanized on intake.
Okay. Are there any, Dr. Riley, are there any animals native to Virginia that are especially vulnerable or at risk right now?
Say everything, but that's me being a little bit biased. I'd say the highest at risk, obviously anything threatened or endangered, and DWR keeps a great list of all the threatened and endangered species in our state, and there are a lot of them. So check out that list if you're interested in those. But on a more general scale, I would say I'm always most concerned about reptiles and amphibians. We mentioned earlier how many, are getting hit by cars right now. It is that breeding and mating season for a lot of our turtles, and many of these species are in great decline. And when you hit these adults, the ones that are actually in the road moving and stuff, these are the ones that are active reproductive animals, and they're going to be breeding every year. In many cases, they could be 50 plus years old, these box turtles and stuff like that. So these are animals that have been successful for years, and you hit them one time, you've taken that animal out of the population. It's a massive decrease to the genetics in the area. And they have such a small home range, especially for things like box turtles, where they're often in a hectare or less. That's why we don't relocate them, right? Why we don't want to move them. beyond the shoulder. I always tell people cross in the direction they were crossing and put them a couple feet off the shoulder. You don't even need to walk them into the woods. You don't need anything else. Just get them across the street. Because if you walk them 100 feet into the woods, that might be outside their home range. And when they were born 50 years ago, there wasn't a road there because we have so much development in this area. So there's a lot of those kind of things to think about. And I think those species are very much at risk. The other ones that I worry a lot about are grassland birds. We know that all birds are declining at insane rates. Since the 70s, we've lost billions. This is ongoing. Grassland birds at an even higher rate than other animals. And that's because people, I think, look out the window in Virginia, they see green areas, and they think it's grassland. But that is not the same as native grassland and what was supposed to be there and what actually supports life. So similar to how your lawn does not support life, it's not native grasses. We want native plants and native grasslands to support grassland birds, and that's the only thing that can really do it. So I'd say the turtles, the songbirds, and then honestly, everything that's just decimated by cats in this area. We have so many outdoor cats in Virginia, and we know that that's a massive welfare issue for not only the wildlife, but for the cats as well. 2.4 billion birds a year that they kill in the US, 20 billion mammals, and hundreds of millions of reptiles and amphibians. So everybody's kind of at risk from a variety of things, but these are all human-caused issues, window collisions, things like that. There's so many issues that humans are impacting, and unfortunately, it's just decreasing our biodiversity and decreasing the number of species that we have in Virginia.
I'm going to add on to that too, and just mention bat species as well. It's
Absolutely,
a group and assemblage that have been, declining, especially those hit hard by white nose syndrome historically. And so that, coupled with habitat loss and development, many of our bat species are, sensitive and rare in some cases. And so that's one reason why we're doing inventory monitoring surveys here in the county to see what species are still present in many of our parklands. Obviously, with bats, there's different protocols if there's been a potential exposure to a person or a pet that has to be followed. But overall, I would put them on the list of species of concern that have been declining and warrant additional conservation measures wherever appropriate.
Absolutely.
It's an important one. So what can we do about this decline and the loss of biodiversity? And is there something that our residents and action they can take that would really impact the lives of wild animals?
So many. I think that we've already mentioned a lot of them, but certainly planting natives and protecting habitat. So really understanding and educating yourself on what is native habitat and why it's supporting life when your lawn isn't. So looking into that kind of stuff, planting where you can, even small areas, like if you have, just half an acre, that's still plenty of space to really be able to make a huge difference. So I would definitely recommend people plant natives. Keeping cats inside is a huge one, building catios for animals that need to go outside, leash walking cats. There's so many options that you can do to give your cat good enrichment that's safe for them and safe for wildlife. Protecting windows is a really important one. So if you have large picture windows or anything that reflects the surface, because that's what happens when you have a window strike, right? They're looking at the glass and they're seeing the reflection of the trees and they are flying into those trees. So kind of be aware of what your house looks like from the outside and where reflection is happening. And you can use things like bird-friendly tape or ABC tape, or even just we use dry erase markers at the center and color over them. So there's plenty of options that you can do at a variety of price ranges to figure out ways to protect your windows. If you do feed, which we don't ever recommend, as you mentioned before, it messes with the biodiversity. You are promoting some overpopulated animals while really harming animals that don't need that feed that are now being outcompeted, basically. So we don't recommend feeding, but if you are going to feed, making sure that you clean your feeders regularly, at least once a week. We do see a lot of feeder-borne diseases here, things like mycoplasmosis, trichomoniasis, lots of parasites. So feeders are really dangerous, especially if they're not cleaned. And making sure that they are less than 3 feet from the window or greater than 30 feet from the window to prevent window strikes associated with feeders, which also happen really commonly. The lawn mowing stuff, checking and making sure that you're agitating the lawn before lawn mowing, raising the blades on those tractor style mowers and things like that. I know I'm missing some good ones. If you have any other, Dr. Edwards, you can jump in on those.
I feel like you went down my checklist. I mean, a lot of it, yeah, a lot of it's the natural landscaping, so planting natives, but also increasing, structure within your yard if possible, adding a water feature, whether that might be a bird bath or a small pond or something that can provide water, adding sources of cover as well. So, food requirements are one thing, but many species don't have adequate cover. So finding, different variety of plants and different structures within your natural environment, along the lines of safe birds. There's a big movement right now for lights out Northern Virginia, turning off your exterior lights so that you're not impacting migrating birds that are happening right now through spring. It's recommended currently to do that through May 31st. So we've got another couple of days or so during that critical spring migration where birds are migrating mostly at night. And so we do see a lot of window collisions and building collisions occurring during that time. So turning out those lights, removing decorative lighting, especially on your upper levels. And as you mentioned, putting decals or other visible signs so that windows are more visible to our migrating birds. Feeding is one of the huge ones. I mean, you touched really just a moment ago, mainly on kind of bird feeders, but feeding in general is one that I think people need to be more aware about. And we do see a lot of cases of intentional feeding within the county, but also just accidental feeding. So unsecured food sources with unsecured garbage and compost, feeding your pets outside and not realizing that everything else finds that really delicious and is going to get into it. So our raccoons and foxes and skunks all really love dog and cat food as well. And so refraining from putting those food sources out there or securing them. It can be as simple as just putting your garbage out the morning of pickup. The type of trash can I have is easy to get into, so I just put bungee cords on it to strap it down. And so it takes a couple extra minutes in the morning when you go out, but that's a very small price to pay for knowing that you're saving wildlife. And so it also helps to create situations where they're not becoming habituated, because usually when we see wildlife that really start to depend on human provided foods, we can see those safety situations arise and wildlife can pose a danger as they associate people with food. Another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize that we get calls about is where one neighbor might be feeding wildlife or putting up feeders to attract them to the property. The neighbor next door might not have the same tolerance and acceptance of wildlife. And so we see situations, unfortunately, where one neighbor's attracting the animals, they're becoming habituated to those food sources and to being in such close proximity around homes. And then a neighbor 1 or 2 doors down is trying to trap and remove those animals. And so it can be a death sentence for animals when they're being intentionally fed, especially. But we want to remove all food sources and reduce, reliance on them, even if it's accidental.
Use the phrase that fed wildlife is dead wildlife, and it's very, very true. And not just because of the habituation factor is certainly true, but also things like just congregation in general, right? Feeders are causing congregation, whether it's a bird feeder or putting your cat's food outside. So never leave that food. If you do feed any pets outdoors, try to do it at the same time every day and leave it out for no more than 30 minutes. Monitor your pet eating it and make sure that it's not being spread. We do get distemper outbreaks and stuff like that associated with feeding stations. So it can kill massive amounts of wildlife through disease. Also, those animals are coming to feed together. So you have raccoons, possums, foxes, all of these guys at the same feed dish, and then we get fights, and then we have physical trauma. So there's just so many things that happen from that, in addition to it just not being an appropriate diet for these animals, and then causing health effects from that too. So it's just on so many levels, so dangerous for wildlife.
And so important. I think people are very well-meaning and they really enjoy seeing those animals, but understanding that that's posing a danger and can actually be quite harmful. The other thing I'd love for one of you or both of you to talk about is pest management. I know, Dr. Riley, you see animals coming to you that have been poisoned, especially birds of prey, because they're consuming rats or mice that homeowners have intentionally poisoned through baiting to try to eradicate them, not recognizing the circle of life and that those little creatures are a food source for bigger creatures. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. We see we see a lot of poisoning, a lot of different variety of poisoning. Even though a lot of it, like the clinical rodenticide cases that we see in raptors are few and far between, we also know that from multiple research studies that clinically, even if they're not showing signs, these guys have exposure to these rodenticides. Almost 100% of them have exposure to these rodenticides.
Wow.
And it's not just the raptors, it's the foxes, it's the bobcats, it's the raccoons, and it's not just anticoagulant rodenticides. So we do have anticoagulant rodenticides, which are actually one of the easier ones to treat. So that's kind of nice. When we get rodenticides, we hope for that. We hope they haven't bled out yet. So that's one of the things that we can actually provide a little bit of treatment for. There's also neurotoxin rodenticides. We've seen a lot lately of the zinc toxicity from apparently there's a mole rodenticide or a mole deterrent that people can buy that has zinc in it. These guys eat the zinc, they die, and then other animals eat the zinc. And it's another type of heavy metal poisoning, just like lead poisoning, which we see all the time from ammunition, gut piles, things like that. So we see a lot of poisoning, and it's all human introduced. So that's definitely something that we would also recommend. Avoid using rodenticides, avoid using heavy metals that you're putting out into the environment. But yeah, a lot of rodenticides, and there's not a need for it, right? Like the answer is always the same, is going to be to, if you're having mice or rats in your home, is to seal off the entryways and trap them in humane traps, put them outside your home. It's still illegal to relocate them. You can't move them off property. But if you do that and you keep closing off entryways as you go, and it can take a while to find. I did this in my own house. I live in an 1800s log cabin with lots of holes in it. So It took me quite a long time to get all the mice out of there. But it is definitely possible. And sometimes you have to go, space by space. You're finding these holes one at a time over the course of a week. But if you're just constantly snap trapping them, which is much more humane than rodenticide, if you're going to do any kind of fatal method, please use snap traps. Just the old fashioned kind are going to be the most humane, lethal option. But just like rodenticide, you're not solving the problem. You're leaving all of the access available, and it's just going to be this endless cycle of death, right? You're just going to have to keep killing these mice and rats forever. Whereas if you're actually taking the steps that you need to put food away, to store things properly, to keep things tidy, and to close off the entryways as you find them, you're not going to get those mice in your home anymore. You're not going to need to do any of that. So it does take a little more work up front, but it's definitely a much more effective method in the long term. And by supporting the native wildlife in your area, the native predators that are eating these animals, you're going to have less of them. So we know rat snakes eat a whole lot of rodents. They actually have good studies in as close as Maryland talking about how timber rattler snakes reduce the incidence of Lyme disease because they're eating so many ticks on rodents. So we know these guys are important to our health, to keep them alive. And when you're killing, the raptors or the bobcats or the snakes in this way by giving them rodenticide poisoning, because it does kill all of these species the same, you're preventing, those predators from eating those pests in the future. So keep your predators healthy, keep the rodenticides out, keep the heavy metals out.
And again, I just want to reiterate what you just said about, it's not addressing the problem. And so I think with a lot of wildlife concerns, it's just the knee-jerk reaction of there's a conflict occurring. How do I get rid of the animal? And so going back and having to take a hard look at what are the practices that are causing the problem in the first place. And typically with pest control situations with rats and mice, you're dealing with a food issue. And so whether that's in the interior of the home or outside because of trash collection pickups or the way that the trash is unsecured or disposed of, it might take some extra responsibility of a homeowner to make sure that they're disposing of garbage properly, or contacting an HOA if it's a problem within the neighborhood and others are not adhering to those guidelines, but really trying to address the root cause of the problem and not just that ongoing cycle of getting rid of the animal if you're not containing the problem itself.
And I would also talk about this time of year, especially with all the babies and baby season, we see a lot of people trapping and either illegally relocating or having a pest control company trap and euthanize, which is what they have to legally do in Virginia. And then you have orphans. So now you have all these babies, and a lot of people, even though they're fine with the parent being killed, do not want the babies killed. So then they end up in rehab. And we intentionally do not rehab animals in those situations. That is a pest control situation. If they had to euthanize the parents, they have to euthanize the babies too. It's an unfortunate situation that didn't need to happen that way in many cases. And for things like groundhogs or animals that are just like, they're not in your home, they're just causing some kind of inconvenience to you, really think about what time of year it is and if they have babies that time of year. So with groundhogs, we know that, they're going to be with their babies until September. So don't be trying to evict groundhogs before that time of year if you can avoid it. Bats are having babies, and they're going to have babies that can't fly, through the summer, through June, and they're going to benefit from being with their parents. So don't start evicting parents and leaving babies to die in your attic. So just kind of think about the time of the year a little bit as well, and know that it's not just the one adult that you're seeing that might be living there.
Right. So I think the end of the day, putting a little thought into pest management, right? Because pest controls and pesticides also greatly impact birds that are consuming those bugs and rely on those for a food source, and just same with the rats and mice and the rodenticides, and thinking a little bit downstream or broader in how the food chain works, and it starts right in your backyard, right? But those are really small things that we can do that will dramatically improve the lives of the animals that live around us. Are there any, I know we're running out of time here, are there any resources you all suggest for people that want to learn more about pest proofing their homes, or planting natives, or using more humane methods of pest control that you could suggest?
I would say the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources has a good webpage on habitat at home. And so they do have a lot of resources on there with links to different groups for plant Nova natives, different landscaping tips, resources online of where to get native plants and other structural components for your property. And so that's a good place to start, at least to learn about what would be beneficial for native wildlife here in this area.
Yeah, and on the pest control side, I really like a lot of the Humane Society's what to do about pages. If you Google Humane Society and what to do about whatever species, so what to do about groundhogs, what to do about foxes, they'll give you a long list of different things that you can do, and different deterrents you can use, time of year, situational kind of important stuff. So those are really good resources. And the Wild Neighbor book that they do as well, which I think is all online now in a PDF, is also a really good resource for a lot of that stuff.
That's great that they are now known as Humane World, though they did a rebrand. So I've started pulling up parts of my yard and replanting, going with native vegetation, and I found the Virginia Cooperative Extension has some really great tools for how to do that, and whether it's sun or shade and drainage and that kind of thing, and just creating those natural food sources for animals is so important. So you don't need to put out the feeders, which I used to be a feeder person, and now knowing that I'm providing for them through all these beautiful native plants and that are blooming and thriving year round is much more important. So we just have a few minutes left, so I'll leave you both with a final question. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing for wildlife in Virginia, what would that be? So Dr. Edwards, I'll start with you.
I would just say acceptance. I would say, I really would stress for people, we often fear what we don't know. And I think there's a lot of misplaced fear when it comes to wildlife, just because we're not expecting to see it in our yard, or we don't know if what we're seeing is normal behavior or something that we need to be concerned about. So I would just encourage people to learn more, to educate themselves about our native wildlife and what normal behaviors are. And then if you're concerned, then reach out to a professional and talk that through, versus just that knee-jerk reaction that it needs to be feared and it needs to be removed. And so just having more of a respect and appreciation for our wildlife.
Love it. Dr. Riley.
I totally agree with everything she said too. But to add one, I would say that I really wish that we could get legislation keeping cats indoors and providing better care for cats in Virginia. There are local ordinances in some places that have done really great work, and I would love to see that across the state and have cats treated much more like dogs, where there are leash laws, there are free roaming laws, and where they're really offered better protection and in turn can protect our wildlife.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I learned so much. I'm sure everyone that attended did as well. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
We were happy to be here.